This is goal 4. This is about the tissues. The objectives include describing the structure, function, and location of epithelial tissues, relating the structure of cell junctions to their functions in epithelial tissues, distinguishing between the endocrine and exocrine glands, describing the structure, function, and location of connective tissue, muscle tissue, and nervous tissue, and describing the generic tissue response to an injury. So what's a tissue? A tissue is a group of cells or a layer of cells that all do the same thing. They have a similar function. There are 4 types of tissues: epithelial, connective, muscle, and nervous. We'll be discussing in some detail each type and the characteristics of each type. You will also be learning about what each looks like and where it is found in the body. The study of tissues is called histology. So we're going to start with epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue has 4 jobs: protect us from the outside world or from things on the outside of it, absorb things, for example the stomach and intestine lining, the guts, organs all absorb nutrients, filters like that in the kidney, and secrete things, particularly glands. They are closely attached, always forming a protective barrier. On one side there's always a space referred to as the lumen, usually the outside of a body like the skin or a cavity in the body. It's always fixed on the other side to the connective tissue underneath. That's called the basement membrane or basal lamina. And it doesn't have any blood vessels within it. Under it, yes, but not within it. It also can have quite a few nerves in it. They tend to be very good at regenerating. They do mitosis very quickly. For example, sunburn heals fairly quickly. You get new skin. Epithelial tissue can be found all over the body, and because it lines cavities and organs, every hollow organ and tube in your body is lined with epithelial tissue. The blood vessels, the entire digestive tract, the uterus, uterine tubes, the vas deferens in the male, all of these are tubes or organs that are lined with epithelial tissue. On one side of epithelial tissue, it always faces a space. The space might contain something. For example, blood vessels contain blood, so that lumen is filled with blood. It doesn't necessarily have to be empty space. The other side of epithelial tissue is attached to the tissue underneath. The attachment or the anchor is called the basement membrane or basal lamina. Again, it lacks blood vessels, which means that it can slough off or break off, or the cells can be lost and you don't bleed to death. We shed skin cells all the time and do not bleed all the time unless we get all the way through the epithelial layer to the layer underneath. Epithelial tissue again easily reproduces. We lose them rapidly, we make them rapidly. We do mitosis all the time. There are types of epithelial tissue, or they're typed based on 2 things: whether they're a single layer or more than 1 layer. A single layer of epithelial tissue is called simple. More than 1 layer of cells is called stratified. The 3 shapes of cells are squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Squamous is kind of a star shape, cuboidal like cubes, and columnar like columns. Embedded within the epithelial tissue are goblet cells. These secrete mucus and are very prevalent in the intestinal system and the respiratory system. There also may be glands within the epithelial tissue. Between epithelial tissues, they have to be, or between the cells, they have to be connected. Some epithelial cells are very, very tightly packed together, and there needs to be a tight barrier between what's on one side and what's on the other. Sometimes the barrier doesn't need to be as tight, it needs to be more porous. So there's different kinds of junctions between the cells. The junctions between the cells are called intracellular junctions, and there's 3 main types. Tight or occluding junctions hold the cells very tightly together so that things cannot squeeze between. Okay, so it would be like you pressed right up against somebody the whole length of your body. Nothing could get between you. These tissues are not permeable. For example, the blood vessels in the brain creates the blood-brain barrier. Desmosomes are like spot welds between cells. They reinforce the structure, but they don't prevent things from moving between. So it would be like you holding hands with somebody. You're connected, but somebody could go, or something could go over or under your arms. Gap junctions are actually channels or tunnels between two cells. They connect the cells in a way, but you can pass things through the tunnels between one cell and another. So it would be like you having a breathing tube to your friend, and you both would be breathing through that tube through each other. Some less permanent attachments between cells are referred to as cell adhesion molecules. There's a bunch of different kinds of these. Selectin and integrin are just two. They seem to play a role in white blood cell movement, making white blood cells have traction with each other, for example. But it also seems to play a role in metastasis of cancer, so it's a great area of research. The next several slides are pictures of the different kinds of epithelial tissue. You have all of these pictures in your atlas. You should know basically that this is epithelial tissue, but you should also know where each one is found. Here is simple squamous epithelial tissue. This is found lining the air sacs of your lungs. It's also found in the walls of your capillaries. Here's a look at it from the face down point of view. Simple squamous epithelial tissue, again looking at it from above, and here in the bottom right diagram lining a kidney glomerulus. Simple cuboidal epithelium is found in tubes like that in your kidneys, also in the ovaries, the ducts in your ovaries, salivary glands, pancreas, and liver. Simple columnar epithelial is found in the small intestines. You can see goblet cells are embedded here. They secrete mucus. We'll talk about those again in a second. Here's another example of cuboidal and simple columnar epithelial. Pseudostratified ciliated columnar epithelial looks like it's more than one layer, but it's actually a single layer of columnar epithelial. It also has cilia on it. You find this in the respiratory tract, in your nose, in your trachea. It catches debris. You can also see goblet cells within this as well. Lots of mucus created in your respiratory tract. There's another picture of pseudostratified columnar, and here's stratified epithelium, many layers. Stratified epithelial can be found in your bladder, and your skin is also stratified epithelium. Here's another picture. This is of skin. You can see as the cells move up away from the connective tissue underneath, they get flattened because they're filling with keratin. Non-keratinizing stratified epithelial is found in the vagina. Many layers again, and here's an example of stratified cuboidal. That is a sweat gland. The next slide is transitional epithelial. This is found in the bladder or other organs that stretch, because obviously at times the bladder is empty and it kind of folds in on itself and then it stretches as it fills up. The glands found within epithelial tissue are usually made out of columnar or cuboidal cells, and they secrete some sort of product. There's two kinds of glands, endocrine and exocrine. Endocrine glands secrete into the body, usually in the blood, and for example, all the hormones are secreted by endocrine glands. Exocrine gland secretion is to the outside of the body, so sweat, saliva, digestive juices, earwax, all of these are exocrine because the secretion is going outside the body. Some of the glandular secretions can be divided into three different types: merocrine, apocrine, or holocrine. Merocrine glands secrete a fluid product, for example, saliva or sweat. They just secrete the fluid to the outside of the body. Apocrine glands, when they secrete, there's a secretion, but there's also little pieces of the cell that break off and are part of the secretion. So the secretion is going to be a little bit thicker. Milk is actually an apocrine secretion, and earwax is an apocrine secretion. In fact, the fat in milk are phospholipids from the cell that it was secreted from. Holocrine glands make a secretion, but the whole cell also is secreted as part of the secretion. And An example of these are sebaceous glands, which are the ones that are associated with your hair follicles, and it makes your hair oily and waterproof, but they also are active during adolescence and they get infected, and that's what you get zits from. Goblet cells secrete mucus, and there's a really good picture here of a bunch of goblet cells along the intestinal walls, because your intestines secrete tons and tons of mucus to make sure your food slips and slides through without tearing anything up. And that is the end of epithelial tissue. The next one we're going to talk about is connective tissue. Connective tissue is the most abundant one. It's all over the body, and unlike epithelial cells, the cells in connective tissue don't actually touch each other. They secrete a matrix, and the matrix is what defines the connective tissue. So it's like cell here and there and in a bucket of goop, and that goop is the matrix. Surprising, but the function of connective tissue is to connect things. It's to hold things together. It can be located anywhere. They have a fairly good blood supply. Generally they reproduce okay, although cartilage cells, which is a connective tissue, generally don't replicate very well. So the cells in connective tissue, again, they don't touch each other. They just kind of hang out in the matrix. There's three kinds: fibroblasts, macrophages, and mast cells. The fibroblasts are the ones that are more fixed in place, and they secrete the matrix. Okay, they're kind of large star-shaped cells, and they produce different matrix depending on which type of connective tissue it is. The mast cells and macrophages move around and clean up the mess, MMM. These are white blood cells that run around and they either clean up infectious particles or broken things, or cells that are too old and old fibers and that type of thing. Mast cells in particular will react if you get into something you're allergic to and release histamine and cause all the side effects of an allergy attack, for example. The fibroblasts secrete fibers into the matrix, and there's three types of fibers: collagen, reticular, and elastic. And collagen fibers are known for their strength. They're very stiff. They're not very elastic. They're there for strength. There you find a lot of them in ligaments and tendons. So they're kind of hard to chew on, for example. Reticular fibers are actually really thin fibers of collagen, and you find this in organs like the spleen and the liver to give it scaffolding or structure, but that's why liver is kind of chewy if you've ever eaten it. And elastic fibers, guess what they are? Elastic. They function to retain shape. You might find elastic fibers, in your ears, for example. So the different types of connective tissue include loose, adipose, reticular, dense, elastic, the three kinds of cartilage, bone, and blood. So there's lots of different kinds of connective tissue, and the next several slides just show you pictures of these. So again, you should recognize that this is connective tissue. Even if you don't know it's loose, you can see that there's lots of fibers and the cells don't touch each other. Loose connective tissue is found in the skin. Adipose is another kind of connective tissue. This is fat. Okay, and the matrix is actually inside the cell in this one. It's basically globs of fat. Reticular connective tissue is found in the liver and spleen. You can see the fibers and the cells are a little bit more closer together, but again, generally not packed together. Dense connective tissue, the fibers run parallel to each other. There's 4 or 5 cells you can see here. Dense connective tissue is found in tendons and ligaments. It is very strong. Elastic connective tissue, the fibers are a little bit more wavy here because there's elastic fibers. It's found in the aorta, which much stretch and bounce back into shape every time your heart beats. The 3 kinds of cartilage. The first one is hyaline cartilage. The closest we have to bone. Hyaline cartilage forms the end of your nose, for example. It always looks like hard-boiled eggs in a purplish blue background here. Okay. The cells in cartilage are called chondrocytes, so the fibroblasts are a little more specific here, and they're in spaces called lacuna. and outside the lacuna is the matrix of cartilage. It also forms part of your nose, and it's in your trachea. Elastic cartilage is a little more rubbery, it's more flexible. You can find this in your ears. It too looks like hard-boiled eggs in the matrix, although the background there's a little bit more of those blue fibers you can see floating around in there. And the last type of cartilage is fibrocartilage. It is between your vertebrae. It forms the discs. If you've ever had a slipped disc, for example, it's the fibrocartilage has come out from between your vertebrae. Really, really hurts. It helps act as a shock absorber. Bone is also connective tissue. The cells in bone tissue are called osteocytes, or bone cells, which we'll be learning about when we get to the bones. The matrix is collagen that has been mineralized. It absorbs calcium and phosphate, makes it very, very hard. The osteocytes, again, are in spaces called lacuna, and they're connected with tiny little canals to the larger the central canals. The tiny little canals are called canaliculi, which is kind of a cool word to say. And the larger canals are where the main blood vessels run up and down or horizontally. And the last type of connective tissue is blood. Blood is a liquid connective tissue. The matrix is called plasma, and the cells in them include red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. We'll be learning lots about the blood in the second section of AMP2. Alright, before we jump to muscle tissue, membranes found in the body, there are 4 types of membranes found, and they're a little bit like connective tissue, so they stick it in this chapter for some reason. Mucous membranes secrete mucus. Serous membranes secrete serous fluid, which is watery. And cutaneous membrane is essentially your skin. Okay, and we'll be talking about the skin in the next goal. And then synovial membranes secrete synovial fluid, and you find this in your joints. Okay, so along with the connective tissue, you have some membrane-like stuff that you should know a little bit about. The third type of tissue is muscle. All muscle contracts. That's their job. There's 3 types of skeletal tissue, muscle tissue. Number 1 is skeletal, number 2 is smooth, and number 3 is cardiac. So let's look up close at skeletal muscle first. Here's a picture of skeletal muscle. It is voluntary, which means we control it. It is striated. You can see these little horizontal lines. This tube-like thing is the whole cell. You can't even see the ends. Muscle cells can be very long. And it has many nuclei. The little purple things here are nuclei in the cell. So this is a cell that has more than one nucleus. Skeletal muscle is found attached to bones. Okay, here's another picture of skeletal muscle. Nice striations, lots of nuclei. Smooth muscle is involuntary. We do not control it consciously. For example, you don't control whether your stomach is growling or not. It's not striated. The cells are more spindle-shaped, so they don't line up, and there's only one nucleus per cell. You find smooth muscle in hollow organs and in vessels, like your blood vessels, which will vasoconstrict and dilate, depending on whether you need them to be bigger or smaller. In your stomach, the uterus, that type of thing. The last type of muscle, here's another picture of smooth muscle. The last type of muscle tissue is found in your heart, cardiac muscle tissue. It is involuntary, striated, and there's only one nucleus per cell. So you can see the striations. These little white lines here are intercalated discs. That's between this muscle cell and that cardiac muscle cell, and they have lots of gap junctions to allow free flow of calcium through the cell, because you want even contraction with your heart. We'll talk about that more when we get to the heart. Here's a good picture of cardiac cell. Again, the intercalated discs here are dark purple. The last type of tissue is nervous tissue. It is found in your brain and spinal cord and in the nerves. There's 2 types, neurons that send impulses and neuroglial cells which function to support those neurons. Some neurons have very long axons, these processes that stick out, so it's very rare that you could see one cell under a microscope. You're only going to see part of it. You can kind of see this here. Here's the cell body and these long processes, axons and dendrites off the neurons. So what happens when you're injured? We'll talk about this a little bit more in the next section as well, but one of the first things that happens is chemicals are released to induce inflammation. And the capillaries start to constrict if they were poked, and they dilate if they were not, so it brings more blood nearby, but that won't happen if the capillary was broken. That capillary would constrict to start to form the clot. Blood then flows, and you get more inflammation and redness and puffiness. There's pain, which helps you rest it or go get help. So even though pain is kind of a pain in the butt, literally, swelling is important to help you know what to do and where to fix it. The extra heat helps denature proteins and bacteria, also increases metabolism and blood flow to get more white blood cells there. White blood cells are going to do phagocytosis and clean up the area. So you have injury, then you have inflammation, and then the repair process can set up after you stop leaking blood, and the white blood cells get there and start cleaning up the mess. So don't forget, your atlas has lots of pictures on your tissues. The other PowerPoint available for Goal 4 is a tissue practice test. There is no oral recording for that, so check it out if you're interested. Don't forget, you can always Google this stuff and ask me questions.